Yeah, this was a. So,
All right, everybody ready? You want to start us off with deprecating the? No, start us off, not start us off.
Sorry, I don't even have the other paths.
Deprecating the OF interface and OVSDB interface.
Yeah, I will deprecate it. OVSDB was still not deprecated, so there's a small patch. I'm not sure whether merged or not. It wasn't, yeah. So I have a patch. I don't know, maybe we already merged it, but it just deprecates the option so that in the next cycle we can remove it and all the pluggable stuff, I guess, too. And for OF interface, it was already deprecated in previous cycle. So I started some work in progress patch, removing the option and the CDL implementation and cleaning up all the tests. It's huge, a bunch of thousands of lines.
So this cycle would be remove OFCTL then?
Yes, and deprecate all the SDB interface. Oh.
Does anybody have any concerns about that?
No, my concerns were addressed.
Okay. So no more OFCTL calls this cycle, and then starting next cycle, no more calls. Native's already default for both of them, right?
Yes, for since Neutron, I think.
Okay.
Just for the sake of precision, it's not really not anymore, because we have a bunch of places in the Neutron Stadium project where the only thing that's done is OFCTL.
Okay. But so if they're not going through the interface, the driver interface that then chooses between the two. They're just explicitly calling it. Okay. Well, that wouldn't be impacted by this then anyway. So the other topic related to the OVS agent is OVS firewall. To be able to migrate to that, we kind of discussed this a little bit at the summit, but I don't think there was any code put up for that, right? Yeah. Okay. And is anybody working on that anymore?
I mean, the deprecation or
Migration.
Well, we can't deprecate it if there's no migration.
So I think nobody's working on migration. The one option was the live migration with the multiple core binding stuff.
Okay.
And we discussed in, I don't know if it was Atlanta or Boston, but basically the idea was to just drop the IP tables rules, leave the integration between them, keep it living until it just.
Yeah, that's probably the easiest and safest thing to do. They'll just be kind of like the performance hit for the legacy VMs that still have the IP tables, the Linux bridge for IP tables filtering. But so for that, we need some kind of either script that needs to be run or some logic in OVS firewall to just blow away the old IP tables rules.
Or maybe agent, because agent needs to know the IP table stuff. And
right.
Both firewall and IP tables. So it could be the security group agent.
Okay. So then what I'll do is I'll file a, as an action item here, I'll file a bug to get that logic added to the L2 agent. Okay. I was hoping Sean Mooney would show up for the using OSVIF inside of Neutron. So the idea of here is to replace our like agent Linux interface module with calls to OSVIF. So whenever the agent itself needs to plug into a network like the DHCP agent or the L3 agent, it would use OSVIF to do that. So we're sharing the logic with how Nova does it, and then we don't have to have duplicate wiring logic inside of Neutron. I think Sean had mentioned that he has somebody, it's either somebody at Intel or somebody that he knows has worked on a proof of concept for this, and he might be able to take up doing that work. So we'll just have to see. I think the main issue here is just having somebody that has the time to implement it and test it and all that kind of stuff.
It's Rodolfo.
Yeah, it might be Rodolfo.
Yeah, actually, Rodolfo pushed a spec for the Nova. There's some they're wanting to do several things with this, and he related to this, and Rodolfo pushed a spec for the Nova side of it. So he's involved. Yes.
Okay.
That's one part.
Do we need to implement some specific drivers? We have IPS interface driver.
Or we can just drop IPS. I know that the guys at Big Switch that do the IBS stuff, and I think they're working on an OSVIF plugin for it. So I think Big Switch is the only company that's using IBS. Is IBS the only one we have in the tree, other than OBS and Linux Bridge?
I think so.
Okay.
We don't have its interface driver in network.
Okay.
But we have the OSVIF driver as well. So
Okay.
it's no problem for us.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so I don't think we need to wait on Dolph to reply.
No.
As long as somebody is volunteering to work on it, I think it's a fine feature. I don't think there's any really big risks going that route that I can think of. And we're gonna have to bring in OSVIF into Neutron as a dependency anyway if we start returning OSVIF objects to Nova during the word binding process. So I don't think it's an issue. Should we talk about the DVR OpenFlow experimental feature?
So we are. So David has started. We have actually a proof of concept that David from Intel has been working on, and it's essentially an implementation of Neutron routers based on OpenFlow. And he essentially created something parallel to namespace-based routers. And the idea is that they are going to be able to work at the same time. Have you taken a look on the file set?
I haven't looked.
I just started to look into it.
Yeah.
So,
So we discussed this in the drivers meeting
Mhm.
last week, I think, or 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and we had an agreement that we're going to let the L3 stuff become stable again, the L3 DVR, but that we want to see the POC and see if how well it works along with the other routers.
Can it be done entirely as a separate L3 agent, so we don't even have to change the
I
code?
think in principle it could.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a matter of actually.
What was your question?
Can the OpenFlow based DVR approach be done with a completely separate L3 agent?
Yeah, I think that's what he's proposing.
Okay.
He's proposing a different agent type. That's it. Still using our L3 agent base code, and then he's proposing a different agent type.
Okay, but it doesn't require any other changes to the L3 agent itself, does it?
So far, he has isolated it into a separate file for all his work.
Okay.
All he's pointing it once the packet hits the agent, it looks at the agent type, and then he calls his own classes.
Okay.
That's what he's doing right now. So it's the architecture-wise, it's similar to our L3 agent today. How the DVR is using different L3 agent types.
Yeah.
That's how it's been written so far.
Okay. And then does this replace? Is this just replacing the compute agent, the compute components, or is it also replacing the central?
So far, he has given proof of concept only for east-west.
Okay.
There's no floating IP or no SNAT.
Okay, yeah, because they have to have the connection
Yeah.
tracking logic and all that for
So,
north
so the
south.
only agent type that he has is a DVR bridge agent type. So
Okay.
Yeah, his intent is really to evolve this slowly and carefully.
Okay.
So, I mean, he's been attending the L3 meeting just for this
Yeah.
subject, for the last 2 or 3 months. So yeah, he's not in a rush.
Mhm.
He wants to do it correctly, and he's willing to pursue this as a proof of concept first,
Okay.
and make sure that we don't break anything.
And what's the plan for testing? Because I don't think we want to bring up yet another set of Tempest jobs for another DVR type on top of the existing jobs. Can it get by with like full stack testing? Add some full stack
I
tests.
think that's the solution going forward, because we had a chat with ER, and ER said like multiple use cases may come in and we cannot go for multiple nodes. So the best option is to go for full stack and then have different agent types.
Okay.
This validation may be limited to some use cases, but at least we can validate the agent.
Yeah, and there'll be some data plane testing at least. And, okay. What?
No, I want to add the link to the fact sheets.
Did you find it?
No.
I'll post it.
You found it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it.
Oh, okay. Good. Go ahead.
Very refresh.
So I think that's all there is to say about that.
Yeah. The L2 pop thing, replacing L2 pop with information data model, that would be nice if there was something we could do, because then we could get rid of all the weird like boot up race conditions where it's waiting for forwarding table floods and all that.
Sure.
Hey. You have somebody, is it Rodolfo, that's working on the OSVIF inside of the Neutron agents? Okay, and he'll have time to implement that in Queens, do you think?
So
We already
the
have some proof of concept patches. I linked to
so proof of concept patches for creating patch ports and V pairs. We need to add the other port types in Swift for things like VLAN supports, all that. He also has some proof of concept patches for passing Swift objects from Nova to Neutron so Neutron Mars backend is supported.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the going from Nova or binding requests to say here's all the different types that I know
Yeah.
about.
So what we're doing in the host info object is saying these are the plugins on the host. These are the diff types that those plugins can support, and these are the port profiles that those diff types can support.
Okay.
But yeah, so Rodolfo is working on a few different things. One of them being implementing the new products in Swift in the negotiation.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, and then we can talk more about the port binding negotiation stuff in the cross project with Nova. So the L2 pop thing, and if somebody wants to work on that, I think it's still a good idea. Just I don't have time to do it. What?
Was there ever a spec or?
No, I had the RFE filed. And,
Okay.
I think maybe it was Rita had filed a patch, or no, maybe Anil Venkata to at least get the ARP information out of port messages instead of L2 pop. But I don't think that merged. I don't know what happened with that one. So
if we found someone who worked on it, would you still have time to review it?
yeah, I can still look at the changes and review them.
And make sure that it's not to your liking.
Yeah, because it shouldn't be too bad. The hard part is figuring out how to like get this information stored in the data model in like an upgrade safe way, a rolling upgrade safe way. That was kind of what I was talking to you about yesterday. Because if we can't reference the database right away, I think it'll have to be probably like calculated every time the port gets pulled out in OVO, and that might make port lookups really expensive. So maybe it'll make sense to have it not as part of the port model, but like separate forwarding entry data models that then can still have push notifications and that kind of stuff. The L2 OpenFlow Manager we kind of mentioned yesterday. Is there anything else? Thomas?
What's boxed in this file? Why is it still in POC?
Sorry?
Why is it still in POC? Well,
Because it's not finished.
no, is there any blocking issue that deserves discussion, or is it just going through?
No, the only discussion is that is currently being addressed by David is there was a suggestion by Miguel to have the design done in such a way that the different tables in the pipeline are defined at the startup and not dynamically created afterwards. So all this is done static, essentially at the module loading time. We are just discussing the right way to implement this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any blocking points.
So, and do you think that doing this statically up front is not restrictive enough for? What I mean is, so you chose to go statically define, up front at loading time rather than have this defined at runtime. Have you guys considered like pros and cons of both approaches and listed somewhere for people to understand why you made those design decisions?
The discussion of that led to the decision of making it static was between David and Miguel, so I wasn't part of it, so I can't really answer.
Okay.
I think they were just careful about what may happen if a rogue extension was dynamically adding tables at runtime, and just wanting to have a design that would avoid this.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I was wondering, one suggestion I would like to make in this patch, if you're is to provide some dev-ref type of content that would capture some of these design.
I can ask David to implement that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably he has it on its own, list of things to do. But
yeah,
it's possible that it was captured in the specs, but I don't remind exactly.
Yeah, with the specs aren't always accurate to what gets implemented, and
right.
the ref should be. So if there's any delta which captures there. The other change that's happened is there's a suggestion to make the flow manager be addable to tables other than just the event in the future as well. Because originally this was just for the event. So that requires a slight modification, not too much. So
not too much, but it was actually interacting with other discussions on how the different things were, the different pieces were registered and created at startups. So the patch is just being refined. Yes.
So is there any proposal on how to address conflicts between flows, or say for instance that two conflicting rules get added by two different extensions? How is the conflict resolved?
So
or it's just a black?
It's with the tables basically. You have a fixed pipeline there, and it basically means that we do have a preferential order for certain extensions, so you can't bypass execution flows if you burn like an SFC flow. It was so that's the only way we can really do it, is to have an order. So one of
even
them
that
will
solve all scenarios.
The basic principle is that with this layer 2 flow manager, an extension registers table, and it gets table in which the extension is the only player.
Oh, okay.
So there's one thing that this patch won't give you. It's the ability to have multiple extensions playing in the same table in the same way. It doesn't address this.
Yeah, that's kind of by design.
It's a first step. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then that answers my question, because at that point you're conflict free effectively, because it's isolated. Okay.
And actually, one of the reasons that's been done that way as well is why it was really done dynamically was we don't want the extensions to know that you're going to a table tree. So the actual table number is generated dynamically, so that you can't assume that ACL is going to be a table tree, and then I can put a rule that bypass it as another extension. So
yeah, I mean, if this level of details were captured in the spec, that's great. But yeah, should those details change somewhat during the implementation? It would be nice to have those either in the dev ref in tree or being reflected.
The spec was very, very detailed. I think it was actually coded there.
Cool.
Because that's all we had for the reference implementation.
So is there anything you want to touch base on Linux Switch, maybe?
The trunk scenario needs to be fixed. I think that's the one that's consistently failing in the Linux Bridge scenario job. I haven't had a chance to look at why it's failing. It was passing at one point. Then it could probably be made voting after that. I think the QoS stuff works pretty well for the Linux Bridge. Have you looked at the Linux Bridge scenario job failures at all?
Multi-node?
No, not multi-node, just the...
I was checking multi-node.
Okay.
It was failing sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, the multi-node thing. There needs to be a change to DevStack Gate to set up a tunnel overlay for traffic between the Linux bridge, between the Linux bridge nodes, because Linux bridge will use a multicast address to carry traffic, carry broadcast traffic in a tenant network. And right now, that's just plugging directly into the underlying cloud provider's network and just hoping that it carries multicast between the two nodes, which doesn't happen on some of the cloud providers, depending on which different networks they end up landing on. So there's a DevStack change that needs to be done, and I think it's in DevStack Gate. I'll put a note here for me, because if I don't get around to it, at least somebody will know where to look.
Yep.
To set up a tunnel mesh between them to carry the multicast traffic, and then we don't have to worry about having multicast support on the underlay. That makes sense.
Say again?
Multi-node Linux bridge fails sometimes because it uses a multicast address to carry broadcast traffic on the tenant networks.
So by bypassing multicast, how would you bypass the multicast in the
you-
underlay?
You set up another tunnel mesh on top of it that is just going to use unicast to forward traffic between the two.
How are you gonna set that up?
The way that's done for OBS jobs. There's OBS-based VXLAN
So
meshes.
just in the kernel, literally creating a VXLAN tunnel port, setting it to IP of the other one.
Yeah.
No, but would that logic currently exists like in
DevStack Gate.
DevStack Gate,
It's
right?
just right now it's only done for the OBS jobs.
So okay. Maybe check with Clark.
Yeah, that's how I knew that there is already logic to do this on OBS. And there's a bug somewhere. Do you happen to remember what the title of the bug was?
For the tunnel.
Yeah,
Yes.
or can find it. Okay. And then that has a link to like the code that sets up the tunnel mesh. And then that should fix the instability of the Linux bridge multi-node job. And then for the Linux bridge single node scenario, there's the trunk failure that I guess I can look into that because I'm very familiar with that code.
So at one point, the DevStack Gate logic was using Linux, Linux bridge commands to create the tunnels. Then it was converted to OBS. Then at one point, I saw the logic being converted back to Linux bridge commands. Do you know what the current?
Yeah,
logic?
I don't know which one they've settled on. I remember Clark was mentioning that they were switching back to Linux Bridge, I think. Regular VXLAN kernel interfaces with Linux Bridge. So they didn't have to have OBS when it wasn't an OBS-based job. But
You don't remember what's the latest?
yeah, I think it was just in the process of being converted back like a month ago or something. So I can sync up with him.
Is the DVR OpenFlow thing discussed?
Yes, that's being done.
By David also.
Yeah, it's being done in an isolated way that I think will make it not invasive. It sounds like.
Yeah,
So.
that was your joke. And the only
What was that? I'm sorry.
The OpenFlow DVR.
Oh, yeah.
the only thing they had in his original patch that changed everything was he introduced a base class to just define the interface with all the router info. All the stuff the router info inherited from technically isn't needed, but it's actually kind of nice to have that. So you can actually make sure that the externally called functions are actually implemented in everything that's claiming to be DVR.
Oh, I see.
And he's also attending every week the L3 subject
Yes,
meeting.
he is.
So he's keeping us very well informed.
He just asked me to make sure this is his top 3 priorities basically for this cycle are complete DVR OpenFlow, complete the OpenFlow manager, and start trying to use the common classifier for DHCP classes.
Yeah. That's pretty much the 3 things I identify him with.
Well, that's why I have Dan in his chair at the moment.
So you are his manager or what?
I'm the tech lead for that team.
Okay.
He wants to
And
explain.
does that include Rodolfo as well?
Yes.
Okay, good to know.
Igor, who's doing the NSH stuff on Network C as well.
Finally found one.
Okay. Did you put it right where I made a special spot for it?
It was.
Okay, and then let me document that the trunk scenario needs to be fixed.
Just comment on the ISP driver in Neutron can be dropped. Is that because it's on its own networking, whatever, or the big switch just stops supporting?
They need to work on the OS5 stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
because what we're going to do from an OSS point of view is reach out to everyone who still has code in Nova that doesn't actually have an OSS plugin, and either we'll write the OSS plugin for them and give it to them, or
okay.
We'll if they want to do it notes in the tree, that's fine as well. So we kind of reach out to them already to say this is one of the few edge cases that still doesn't have OSS.
How did you handle the ones that were kind of generic, like 802.23q or whatever that one was?
Yeah, we don't actually have a driver for that yet, so that's still being done. We were thinking of just creating a set of community repos for those.
Okay.
But yeah, one of the goals I'd like to get to in Queens is actually having all of the plugins done by OSS. Yeah. That means let's go write a bunch of drivers for people. Fine.
They're most of them are pretty simple, aren't they? Yeah.
So how many repos have been set up as of today?
A lot of them have followed paths of putting us with the ML2 driver. So they're networking whatever. So they provide both the ML2 driver and the OSS driver. And we can talk about it a little bit more, I guess, with the negotiation, but with that change, it will allow the ML2 driver to say, here's the BIP object, and one of the properties of the BIP object is the plugin name. So if you wanted to choose a new backend, you could literally do this pretty much out of tree, provided you have to change the XML that's generated by that. That's one thing that we're never going to support a lot of.
Right.
So the process is just creating an ML2 driver, create a corresponding plugin. The ML2 driver tells Nova to use that one plugin in the interface, and you're done.
Cool. Is there anything? Is L3HA in good shape right now? Is there anything else that still needs to be done for that?
So some parts were found when Anil started looking at the router migration failures in scenario draw.
Mm-hmm.
He's working on those. So he has a bunch of patches, bunch of bugs reported. So this is the only thing that I'm aware of. It's like $5, 5 patches.
Okay.
Despite that.
So at one point, I remember that discussion that was triggered by the external keep alive the check that now we have. So now I think we can customize the health check logic with an external script, right? So anyhow, one of the discussion points when that bug report was filed is that even if we had the existence of an external check script, that wouldn't necessarily replace the adoption or replace or actually eliminate the need of pacemaker in an HA architecture. And I remember Asaf being very vocal about the adoption of pacemaker in any HA architecture, especially because that's what OSPU was doing. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or you're not the right person?
Yeah, I'm not the right person.
Is there anyone here that maybe, not here in this room, but at the BTG that might be worth talking to on this topic?
So what's the problem that it's solving, Pacemaker, in this case?
Well, in this case, I mean, Pacemaker would be able to detect maybe a broader range of failure modes and fence the node to avoid things like speedway.
Okay, because it's quorum, right?
Yeah. So, but for instance, without the health check, I mean, there were situations where the cluster couldn't detect that the routers had lost connectivity with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So in effectively the cluster was broken, but that wasn't detected. And an external entity like Pacemaker would be able to, with proper logic, to go and figure that out and fence the node. But now, with that extra capability added into the L3HA solution, you can go and plug in more and more smartness in detecting whether there's something wrong.
By default, do we ping external gateway?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
I remember there was some worry about like having that by default because on upgrade, somebody might not have a pingable gateway, and they would both think that they're dead and isolate themselves.
That's a very good point.
There was a discussion of RHA, the previous PTG, and was having a proposal, but I don't think anywhere because there was lots of concerns about touching what kind of worked. There were some, I think, there were claims that some corner cases are not covered.
Without Pacemaker?
Yeah, but by the case. But I think the discussion should have ended with documenting the corner cases, but I haven't seen it.
I can follow up, and because I know that that discussion happened last cycle actually involved one of the SUSE engineers that are on the HA team. I will try and find out from him.
We don't have a section on here, I noticed, for QoS. Are there any plans for QoS related features this cycle? In particular, the kind of minimum bandwidth thing and like getting information to Nova to get that schedulable and.
So that's one of the things that Rodolfo and Paul and myself will be spending a reasonable amount of time on. So we had a impromptu session Tuesday to discuss concept of actually tracking these in placement. So we will be proposing, I'm going to try the spec actually after this, and I'll add kind of debating to be a Nova Neutron. I think I'm going to end up writing two.
Okay.
What we had suggested doing was introducing two new classes. One is just a generic bandwidth class, and the other is a generic BIF class. We would create resource providers for all of the network backends in the placement API. So ideally, the placement client is that's currently there for routing networks to pull that into its own service plugin, and then we'd have the agents or the ML2 driver use that to create, say, an OBS resource provider, under which we would attach bandwidth to that, and then we would be able to, from Neutron, say, I want X amount of bandwidth. Placement will be able to detect that I actually had that bandwidth on that BizNet, or that was mapped as a tunnel provider. And that would allow us to make sure we never oversubscribe. So even in the OBS case where we can't enforce the minimum bandwidth guarantee in OBS at the moment, we can make sure that if I've got 10 gigs of bandwidth for OBS and I have 10 VMs each request 1 gig, I won't schedule 11 to that node. So it's still not enforceable, it's not it's never going to oversubscribe. In the hardware uploaded to OBS case, you should actually be able to do the enforcement in hardware. In the SRV case, we definitely can do it in hardware.
How do you keep track of? So will the operator have to configure that like this FizzNet is wired up to a physical interface that has this much bandwidth? Is that going to be manual?
What I'm hoping we can do is actually have the OBS agent do that by looking at its config file. Now, the one thing I'm not sure about is at the moment we don't have any mapping between the physical interfaces and the bridges.
Right.
There are ways we can kind of try to also detect this. So the only thing that should be on that bridge is a patch port and the physical interface. The only other thing that will ever show up there is a bond port, in which case we actually want to get the bandwidth from the bond. So there is kind of a question, and that's one of the things we'll need to kind of hammer out on the Neutron spec for this is, should we try and do this automatically and actually declare from the agent by inferring which ports are connected to the different FizzNets and create them, or should we have a config option where we actually say these are the ports that are connected? If we can do it automatically without the operator having to be involved, I think that's nice, but the question is, how complicated is that logic?
Yeah, you might still need a fallback too. I remember early on at Miranda, Fuel was doing something weird where it was like OBS was, the physical interface was actually just another like attachment into a Linux bridge or something, so you'd have to like try to follow that all the way until you found a real interface. And
yeah, which gets fairly complicated fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So that's the main hurdle to doing this entirely automatically.
Yeah.
And there's a few ways you could do it. You could literally just have a config option that just declares how much bandwidth that that bridge would have.
Are there any plans to like, if it is automatic, then detect like, oh, one of the bond members failed. Now there's half the bandwidth available.
So that was brought up by Ian Wells.
No,
initially, no.
Okay. Oh, one of the bond members.
Yeah. So at the moment, we don't track link state in Neutron.
Right.
If we did, then sure, we can maybe add that in the future. But until we get that point, I don't think there's actually we can really do for the bond fail case.
Yeah, I think that's the same way to start.
Yeah. So one of the other advantages of this, and it's actually a pity you weren't there, but you were there for the other session. By modeling this in placement in this way, it allows us to associate traits with the OBS resource providers and the bandwidth resource providers. So, for example, Linux Bridge, which the VXLAN network is VLAN transparent. OBS, if it's done with ODL, is also VLAN transparent for VXLAN backplane.
Right.
So if you happen to have Linux Bridge and OBS on the same host, you can try the example, but if you did, and you requested VLAN transparent,
then you
network,
could actually have all the correct.
Okay. Yeah, because right now we use the preference order and the mechanism driver.
Yep.
In the config. But we could actually do something more intelligent. Or, for example, if you wanted a Neutron port that supported the VLAN where VMs, which we have for Linux Bridge again for OBS, but I don't think we have for BPP.
Yeah.
You could also place a node that's incapable of doing that. The big one for me, besides the minimum bandwidth stuff, is the fact that they do FizzNet aware placement for things that aren't routed networks.
Okay.
Because right now, again, we just assume that all FizzNets are trunked everywhere.
Right.
Which kind of works. So at least we assume that the trunked one in one availability zone.
Okay. So aside from minimum bandwidth, are there any other QoS things that need to be done still? I know like SRLV doesn't have ingress limits, right?
That depends on the vendor.
Okay.
So Intel implemented, I think, only egress from VM, and I think Mellanox is the opposite, only ingress through VM or something like that. And it depends on the card, it changes.
There's no implementation Neutron for SRL.
So we don't have limits at all?
You have only egress.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I remember seeing that.
So the egress was implemented because I think that was done by David as well, wasn't it? But I know that's the only thing that Intel can support in their next, but I think Mellanox can support the other direction as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is one feature that is being implemented, which allows to control the DSCP field of the outer head.
Oh, right. Yeah, and I think
Just ready for anyone. For toss inherit from the
yeah, that we just talked about that at the. Yeah.
So David is working on extending the DSP marking to be class-based once we've the common class file. At least it's one of the things he wants to work on. So you can
Okay,
actually,
well, there's a separate one to just at least carry the inner stuff out to the header of the VXLAN packets that are generated. I think that's the one that they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think he has also a patching flag for this. So one thing that would be worth discussing would be if beyond the ability to inherit, we would add the ability to have a finer grain control.
Yeah, that had come up in the RFE. I think
Yes.
we first just start with the inherit just to make sure we can get all the implementation stuff correct, and then because we have to figure out a new API to handle the fine grain control stuff.
So it's okay to do it in 2 steps.
Yeah.
It's worth discussing the second step because it's actually useful. I mean, if you want to allow tenants to mark their traffic,
Mm-hmm.
then you also need a way to have it not directly inherited
Yeah.
to the fabric priorities, or you just break the QS engineering in your fabric,
Right.
or you let the customer do bad things in your.
But right now we don't let tenants set marking, right?
No, but
Yeah.
this is a use case precisely. If you want tenants to set, if you want to let them set the markings,
Yeah.
then you need something else than just
Right.
That's a use case that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think in general we kind of have to figure out how to expand the QoS, some of those QoS APIs out beyond admin only, right? Because almost all of them are admin only right now in policy.json. I think.
I don't think so.
Which one? Here, let me check.
The bundle limits apps.
No, see, create policy, bandwidth limit rules, admin only. Create policy, DSP marking rule, admin only. The only thing you can do is see them.
But they can choose policies that have already been defined, or because
Yeah, so on a port, either they can pick a policy that already exists, but they can't define their own policy. I think is how it works, right?
yeah. And then if you apply the policy to network, it applies to all ports automatically unless you override.
Yeah, we don't have any restrictions on setting the policy on the port, so they can pick the ones that exist. They just can't create any.
Yeah. So it's still operation defined in terms of what the QoS policy does.
Yeah. Should we take a quick coffee break before we discuss L3 flavors? Mm-hmm.
So last week, the guy from Dragonflow had a few questions about the
Yeah, I think I got in touch with him on.
Yeah, that's what I saw something that you were talking. I don't know if you were able to know.
Yeah, I think he either didn't have the question anymore, but he put in details on some of these are from him, I think, on the Etherpad about what the feature
Not to get with. I could try, but I mean, I've been talking about that.
Yeah, the class project is in an overroom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed we have it on our schedule, but I wasn't sure which room.
Okay, so yeah, I see it one.
Okay, but the API does not allow you to solve their science. I mean, we have to like the full operation. Even not.
And you see two possible ways how this tree can get around.
Yes.
One is that we could create a second gateway, which only available with this project, which refers to the underlying physical gateway, or that it could make exactly that choice that is allowed and then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can give an answer on the top of my head. So you're saying that you can update a gateway connection if
you can't update the gateway if it has a connection.
okay, man. So what can you update of the gateway? What are you
basically the basics. So I use cases kind of that they are reconfiguring the hardware below, and therefore they have no interface and they would like to see.
Right, but the interface isn't there associated to the gateway connection object, rather than the gateway itself?
No, it's in the gateway itself.
I'll have to go back and look. I guess, you know, reconfiguration of any gateway potentially was able to avoid, I don't know, using the ARIs when people flight.
Yeah, and that's their basic problem, I guess, because they would like to have
Does anyone want breakfast?
the
There's so many sandwiches. Anyone? Yeah, bacon burrito. Yeah, absolutely. Bacon burritos, sausage sandwiches, and vegetarian. Yeah,
I mean, the best advice I would give you is drop an email on the mailing list because I know that there are people who are
yeah, bacon burritos, one bacon sandwich.
who have been like looking at the food base.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I've stopped looking at it pretty much since the beginning. I mean, I helped bootstrap the project and then I moved on. The other person I would talk to who's around here is Sukhdev, who's also been, been working on that project for a while, but I guess those moved on.
Actually, I have become one or two mayors to do
So maybe we've lost all the folks who have any real prior knowledge. So I mean, if you have a solution, then potentially you can even approach. I mean, I'm pretty sure the gay from VMware is at least interested in people using it. So you may have to like take the patch to the activity.
Because there was suspicion that perhaps the hardware issues.
Possibly. I mean, maybe the lines I mean, because I remember the time into account, like
administrator should be able to say, okay, this is done, and then that's like,
so maybe when you approach the file, you may want to take into account the possibility there's either it fails providing meaningful elements, or what we want to avoid, fail catastrophically, like we did like in Taiwan today, or like different plans, like the bigger issue gets through, but in reality the hardware doesn't support this. So the user expects the operation to be successful, even though it hasn't, if the underlying backend doesn't honor it, and that's even worse. So like these two bigger scenarios, catastrophic and silence, we want to avoid. And then that's how you would eventually work around. Now, if there is also a limitation on the API point of view that prevents you from doing the operation, then it means that you have a cheap API, in which case you will use like if you just mentioned to fly behavior that started and kind of mechanical setting that we can.
And maybe do you have any preference for two approaches in the API, like one allowing the sample only gateway or creating multiple gateways which are not connected on the API, but in fact they are the same?
I mean that sounds like a workaround, right?
Yeah.
It's a step that you take in order to bypass the problem. But then how do you can you actually have two gateways connected on the same network?
I think you can, yeah. I mean, now we have a playground which is not end-to-end, so there's no real traffic in there. Because
So who's going to own
get down into the OBSDB,
this ML2 migration organism?
what would happen on a real network?
The specs. So I read the spec file, and it even has some people do the work. But
Oh, that's the ML2 piece. We are going to do that.
okay, drive.
Well, I mean that is
What's that?
clearly,
Migration to what?
so what is the drawback of the
Nova
creating an
changes to live
an
migration.
extra gateway and then
ML2.
removing the old one?
I think our colleagues
It's a whole spec. I read it just
if they have to
now.
flow these things through on multiple layers, like an ODF particular.
Yeah, that's actually what we are going to discuss on
Yeah. I just didn't know because it's it needs a Neutron person. To
Yeah, I'm not sure how the developer actually end up like
people listening to do the work. It still needs
look
someone
like.
to champion.
So
Yeah, what's the own this?
I think you can do now is try to get hold of the subdev and see whether you can provide more
I'm not.
insight.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think
No, I know.
quite a detailed emails, anyways, and then we can see whether we can get in touch of whether it's is in charge of the code. I remember also at some point, someone from Huawei was looking at it. I don't know, but
He's read it, I'm assuming.
no, and then the
I
other
don't
step
know, make sure.
that would be,
Okay.
make it.
Yeah, I remember I tried some.
You know,
I almost
forward
forgot that
and
work we do was
we can
with
get
network.
to
L3.
I know, yeah.
Like, oh, how do you pre-create the network?
No,
Pre-create this. And I was like, this should just work. And then like, oh, code binding.
Yeah, no, I mean, I gave the impression that I was assuming we were going to do this, and no, that wasn't the plan.
Okay.
I just wanted to
mention that
because in our case, the big port binding still have a data.
Right.
At least that's what we did. We were able to do ahead of time, right? So the port binding happens, and we go ahead and create the rules. Like now, what they're talking about is binding on two places at the same time.
So would we undo what we did based on the, we can report update and we can build stuff based on the update?
I think we need to do anything change like we or sample comes in order that we have because we are already now very on 50 years. So it should not be but we can not be
It's like a software.
if it matters.
Yeah, really my request to you was, let's take a look at it from the L3 perspective, from the perspective of what we already did. And if we need to undo, modify, change, then
big and many of those.
I have to pay a citation. Because
Oh, yeah.
I'm showing up my Clare County yet.
What did you do?
I held my phone drive as of 2017. If they see you holding your phone,
What did you?
immediate check.
Did you get that photo?
Right, that's what we do now.
Be sure that it gets you on the spot.
No, he just pulled me over.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
But actually, I remember a lady disputing that because she said that.
Yeah,
she
I'm
was
not gonna
checking
go to
maps.
court.
But she was
No, you
checking
can't check
maps.
maps. You cannot hold your phone for any reason. It cannot be in your hand anymore.
Oh,
It has to be mounted.
yeah, but
how much
Yeah.
did you?
With the
charge
understanding-
you guys?
I don't know. I googled it. I'm still waiting for something to show up in the mail or for it to show up in the online thing.
based on what we already did.
No, I could go to court and say it was a burrito.
Yeah,
But I don't think it's worth going to court. I think it's going to be like $160.
Yeah, you did it.
But you
might actually have a shop just like, seems like still points on record.
No, there's no points for it. That's the one good thing about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
won't
when you're
impact
doing
insurance,
your
won't impact.
So,
Yeah,
but
so
you
then
can
I will
go
have to do
by
something over there.
Yeah,
maybe
Yeah, I was on the 101. It was a motorcycle cop. It was bumper to bumper traffic.
Wow, we still haven't.
Took my phone out of the holder thing.
Yeah,
And then what did you
I still
tell
look
him?
at it too, but
He's like,
still get confused still.
I didn't tell him anything. Just like I saw you holding
So
your
Neutron
phone.
Legacy is
Driver license and registration.
by default now?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thought I was
So
gonna get
then
maybe a
when
warning or
Neutron-
something, but nope. He
when
was
does
quick.
that code
Filled out
ever
that
get
ticket in like 2 minutes.
It's, I
And
don't
then
think it's,
after I pulled away,
I didn't know if I
he
could set
immediately
something.
like drove past me. He pulled over another car for the exact same thing. Probably pulling in like $1,000 an hour.
Yeah.
oh, I am again like the second PTG I'm working on.
Right. But yeah, I know you. Yeah, you got a bunch of little patches. I think right now. That's amazing. You just have to
When's
add
it down?
one.
Last week,
And find these little bits and
last Thursday.
Yeah, it's just not clear like whether we maybe have something else that we contribute to Legacy.
Right. Yeah, no, I
It's
noticed.
just easier to do in two places.
Yeah, I noticed it was only in one place, but I'll take a look and see.
We were also thinking of one was to do some change investigation. Why did we investigate?
Because the neutral lead is become by the forest system stuff.
I fixed it.
Yeah, you just sent out a patch and I think it's already approved.
Another question. That's nearly frustrating.
Yeah, I didn't have to tweak dev stack.
Yes, it's not available yet.
I don't.
Who's not?
I just had that patch to dev stack and then pipe and then I had a test patch.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to call him. He probably like
But where we're not,
wrote
think
down
that's
my
like
name
it
wrong or
sets that
something.
value. It sets the DVR
You should have like a
mode.
paper sticker.
oh,
Yeah, his handwriting's illegible, so all I can tell is the number up at the top. The citation number is like a pre-printed thing. Yeah, so.
Maybe he wrote your name so incorrect that you actually charged. Just
assume
assume dev stack.
Yeah, if you got my license number right, though, it'll be hard. What I'm worried about is that he wrote everything so incorrectly that like they won't mail it to the right address, and then I'll just have like
Yeah,
a
just says
bench
in
out.
those modes, right?
So I'm gonna call him on the phone probably next week.
Yeah, addresses are correctable, but they're next to the one keep it John's. I'm not that guy. All right,
All right.
I'll look at.
Should we discuss? Really?
Actually, I do.
Well, can we discuss L3 flavors first? Because you need to do all the work.
I'm not gonna do the work.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, with, yeah, no, I understand what's going on. Don't know if I can come up with an answer in the next hour. So I mean, this means that router providers may want to block the creation of a router, for instance.
The deletion of a router?
The creation of a router as well.
Yeah. Okay. So L3 flavors. Right now, there's a bunch of callbacks that do things. Some of them need to be moved. In particular, one of them is a thing that associates the router with a given provider. And so the issue there is it's racy if the providers want to subscribe to the pre-commit create with an event listener and do something only if it's associated with them. So that we can fix with an explicit call to associate a router with a service provider before any of the callbacks are emitted. So then at that point we can at least solve the issue where
So can't you? Sorry, go on.
yes, right now it's just that service providers can't reliably use pre-commit create events to do things in their database.
Right, but what's the resource that they will be subscribing on?
Router.
They shouldn't.
Why?
They should be like subscribing to router provided assigned resource. I mean, don't get fixated on the name, but you know what I mean. You may want to potentially even chain commit events.
What?
So you get to pre-commit event, create pre-commit pre-commit event on routers that the driver the controller, what do you call it, controller driver that subscribes to. That does the provider assignment.
Okay.
At that point, you can trigger a pre-commit event for different resource that drivers would subscribe to, and then you've changed the events, and you're still, like, for instance, in the pre-commit phase.
Yeah.
And at that point, you can influence the decision of whether you're creating, deleting, updating, whatever.
Okay.
That might be a solution.
Yeah, and then that'll avoid the explicit call to the driver controller from the L3 DB code. Is that what you're trying to avoid?
What explicit call are you referring to?
If we move the assignment outside of the callback system of a flavor to a router, of a service provider to a router.
Right. I guess that might kill two birds with one stone, because that's how it is right at the moment.
Right now. Okay.
You're looking at the driver controller code. Okay. So where is the explicit code to the provider?
There's not. That's what I mean. See, right now it subscribes to pre-commit create. So sometimes
from the L3 plugin.
Yeah.
Don't they?
Yeah.
Right.
But so what's the issue with a provider subscribing to router events, other than this?
Well, the issue is that may end up being racy. Like it may end up creating the scenarios that prompted this discussion in the first place, right?
I think the router provider thing is the main issue, isn't it, Yamamoto, that you ran into with MidaNet? Was that the set router provider happened during pre-commit create?
I think you, as a provider, you don't want to subscribe to router pre-commit events. We gotta come up with a different resource that the provider subscribes to, and then we can, by virtue of, like, chaining certain events, you can address the raising issue. And it's almost like, the provider. So you got the L3 plugin, you got the driver controller, and you got the flavor providers on a layered architecture. Like, there are different layer of abstractions, and they shouldn't punch through. They should talk to the layer immediately, over, up. How do you say it? What's the opposite of underneath? Above them. Sometimes I end up painting for no reasons. And that's like the thinking process I'm going through. But I'm not quite sure whether that might end up, like, addressing all the issues that were flagged throughout this process. Because I tried to catch up, but as you might guess,
it might be. It's just then we have to admit, but like floating IP, for example, or do we have to, like, do another set of events for floating IP too?
Okay, so what is the issue with floating IPs? I mean, you end up, so the driver controller doesn't subscribe to floating IPs event at all?
I don't think there's an issue. I don't think there's a racy issue with the driver controller there, because the router is already associated with.
Maybe someone can elaborate what the floating IP issue is?
No, I'm asking if they're not allowed to subscribe to router events, are they allowed to subscribe?
No, it's not that they're not allowed. I mean, the framework doesn't prevent you from subscribing to specific events.
Yeah, I know, but if we're suggesting that they don't subscribe to router events, would the same apply to floating IP events?
But floating IP events are typically are in the workflow of an L3 workflow. They occur well after a router has been has come to life. So at that point, the association between a router and the provider is already done.
Yeah.
Floating IPs actually are not. I guess it should be doable. I mean, when I meant, okay, the providers shouldn't register to router events, but come up with this new router concept is to address this leak that is taking place between the driver controllers and the providers. But that's because the driver controllers is the intermediate layer that ends up like managing routers. But the driver controller doesn't do anything with the floating IPs at the moment, does it?
I don't think so.
So if it doesn't, then I can't see an issue. But if it did, then we may want to think harder about this.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? Is anyone following what I'm saying, or am I talking nonsense?
No,
Yeah, it makes sense. But I mean,
What about you?
I can evaluate that, but the point is you need to have two separate set of events for the controller and the
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
I personally don't have any preference to use clean.
just as long as the problem gets solved. Yeah. And I think, yeah, the rest of the stuff, like the information that you need during after delete and that kind of stuff, I think we can. I don't think there's any issues getting that kind of stuff solved. Somebody just has to do that. I see. Let me see what this patch is. So do you have time to update this patch that you already pushed up, the work in progress thing? Do you have time to work on this, Yamamoto?
I think Yamaha will more concrete proposal.
Okay.
So this one is. Okay.
This one was just minimum.
Okay, this is
For my-
like actually non-controversial and it doesn't raise any potential issue, right? It's just emitting a notification on floating IP. What was that again?
Well, this was putting extra
Right, but
info
that's
in
fine,
the
right? Yeah.
router interface events.
Right now, Internet doesn't recommend the thing, so but ODA needs to connect.
Yeah.
So they have more.
Yeah, because of the journaling thing, right?
Yeah, right.
Right, but then again, rather than subscribing to router pre-commit events, you would again subscribe to router provider whatever pre-commit events, and you'll be able to preserve the same semantic as you have for in order to again ensure that there is integrity in your data store. So basically, we will need to enhance the driver controller logic, as Kevin wrote it initially, to basically notify driver providers that certain router events have occurred, and then the driver providers end up subscribing to those events rather than the ones that are emitted by the L3 plugin.
Yeah, so it'd be like a driver controller router pre-commit create, and then you'd subscribe to that. That would still be inside the transaction, so you could commit to your task database at that point. Okay. The other thing, I don't think anybody mentioned it here. Was, do we want to try to support L3 additional features that are like specific to a driver?
No, I think we didn't we.
I remember somebody had asked about it, and we kind of said no at first.
So yeah, this topic came up, and the answer obviously was no, because that's default. We always say no. It's how we've been trained.
Well, like, are there any L3 extensions that like ODL has that won't work in this approach?
No.
Okay.
Neonet has a few extensions.
The floating IP for IPv6, right, was one of them.
Yeah, I think actually we may ended up making a recommendation because we brought this topic up for review last PTG. We ended up making a recommendation that would solve the problem. I can't quite remember what the recommendation was, but so we said, okay, it's no point in providing a similar mechanism to the ML2 extension drivers where you have a driver that adds more extensions to the supported alias list, but you could still do that if you wanted to from the driver provider. It's a bit hackish, but it kind of works.
Deriving the extensions from the providers. That
But then again, it's
the hard thing is then if you have an extension that just gets loaded up by one of the providers, you can't tell which one is supporting it.
Yeah.
As a user.
I guess it's hard to really judge without like a particular use case in mind, because why did you have to bring it up?
The MinerNet floating IP thing, it's basically just a removing an enforcement that the L3DB does right now, right? For that, what we could do is we can move that enforcement out of L3DB into the reference drivers, and then that way they'll only enforce it if the floating IP is associated with a router that they control. Will that work? Can you put a link to the to that extension, like in the Etherpad here, so we can kind of look at it? Because I think maybe that was what this suggestion was before, was to it's a constraint imposed just by the reference thing. If we can just move that down into the driver itself, then it would work for me.
Floating IP is when created, not associated to a particular router, so it might be flavor independent. Right?
Oh, the IPv6 address is on the floating IP itself. Is that what you're saying? I see.
So if we have routers with different flavors, to reject when associating.
Yeah, the enforcement would have to happen when the user associates. We'd have to say.
So it will be usability change, even if you don't use internet.
Right, because they'd be able to create IPv6 floating IPs, they just wouldn't ever be able to associate them without.
So that is the situation that happens on floating IP operations?
Yeah, it's creating a floating IP with an IPv6 address. Right now, we don't allow it.
How do we prevent it?
Well, I assume something in the L3 code.
Whereas Mesonet does support that.
Yeah. Maybe we should just support IPv6 floating IPs.
Sounds like it.
For this long.
What?
We fought it for this long.
Yeah.
No. Cannot process. You had it.
This one?
No, the one. Yeah, this one.
Yeah. No, that's for internal. But it's somewhere. Here.
Right, but how does the Mesonet bypass that? Do you end up like overriding?
They have their own service plugin.
Right, they have their own service plugin, so they bypass the logic.
Since Mesonet has a custom R3 plugin.
At that point, what you'll end up doing to solve that situation is, emit a before up-to-date notification that could trigger a failure. But even no.
Yeah, so here, I think it would fail here because it ensures IPv4. We'd have to see where it's blocked and then consider lifting it. It's going to be API will now support it, but then nothing. They'll just never be able to associate it. Would be how it would work without my internet.
What is this being captured here?
No.
You wanna capture it?
No,
or-
you can.
I'm not sure I follow fully. You brought up a topic, new topic.
Okay, hang on, I'll make a note then. Handling IP usage. So we can handle that part separately. Let's at least get the plan to get the events fixed up so they're usable. I think everybody agrees on that. It's just work that needs to be done. Do you have time to work on it?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, after CI stabilization, yeah.
Okay.
I can help with the review.
Help with reviews? Okay. Okay. Okay, cool.
So when is talk about the next one in the list?
The dragon flow thing. So the this Omer's not here.
No, he's not here.
The wiring is up to the driver. I'll just leave a response in here because this is asking about how packets are sent.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll leave a response here. With L3 flavors, it's completely up to the driver to actually wire up the routing and that kind of stuff.
There was a good question raised in the spec though. Now, we have a situation where right now it's not even that ideal, where we don't have a way to express compatibility between ML2 drivers and L3 capabilities. With the flavors, things can actually end up being worse. So certain flavors may end up only working with a certain set of combinations of ML2 drivers.
It's same problem as now. With the
Right,
service
but it's actually worse now because you may even introduce more variability in the whole mix.
I don't see how it's any worse. The driver, it's up to the operator to configure which drivers to use.
Worse in the sense that by having more router flavors, never mind, doesn't matter. But you see what I'm saying? That we may want to address once and for all these the desire or the need of expressing the compatibility between L3 flavors and L2, L2 Mac drivers. And then I would be able to kill that config option that we are very cleverly introduced in PAC. To disable DVR as a advertised extension. Do you see what I'm saying now?
No.
Okay. So
because there is no black and white, if this is compatible. You create a router and attach it to a network, you don't know anything about which driver is going to be used on that network.
When we say who do you mean?
If someone creates a router, a tenant creates a router and attaches it to a network, you don't know anything about which ML2 drivers are going to be used for the VM.
Well, okay, so let's step back here. So, for instance, distributed DVR and HA are extensions that the L3 plugin supports that are advertised unconditionally. So when you set up the L3 service plugin that we have in the tree, you're gonna get those two extensions by default.
Yeah.
Okay. However, out of these two extensions, DVR depends on the ML2 backend and on ML2 backend.
Yeah.
The OVS versus Linux switch. So you end up, for instance, having an ML2 configuration that may be incompatible with the L3 plugin when it comes to creating distributed routers.
Well, how did you hide DVR?
Just you don't want to know.
Yeah, because you don't know. You don't know which ML2 driver is going to be used to bind a given VM port.
Right. It's something that you will be able to basically, learn at runtime only when there is a port showing up.
Yeah.
That's why it's not an easy problem to solve. But potentially this problem may arise.
I'm not sure what we can do though.
No.
Let's say we have we know everything that's compatible. What do we block? Because they can create a router, attach it to a network, and we don't know what's going to be used on that network at all. Until they start to actually boot VMs and it can turn out they're using SRLV.
Right.
And then in that case, then DVR shouldn't have been used.
Yeah. Then I guess it's
yeah. We'd almost need to block port binding or something and say, no, you can't bind a port to this network because this network is using a router.
Yeah.
That is from a flavor that is incompatible with that particular type of port.
I guess one way to solve this is to write, validation tools that, go through the configuration, the config of your cloud and flag potentially incompatible behavior. We did something like somewhat clever in the trunking case for the trunk service plugin, where depending on which ML2 driver you had loaded, you would end up crashing at server startup if there was no available trunk and compatible trunk driver.
But that's what I mean. You can't tell it's startup.
In the routing case.
Yeah. Because you can have a bunch of mechanism drivers loaded that won't get used until a user explicitly requests like an SRLV connection. And then the only time SRLV would be a problem is if they actually have an L3 router attached to that network.
Well, I guess you can if, for instance, you have a combination of ML2 drivers and L3 providers. Well, because you can have multiple ML2 plugins and multiple L3 drivers, and then say that you advertise the capability. Should there be at least one combination that is compatible? And then yes, there may be situations where you end up at runtime landing on an incompatible config, and that could be addressed by failing, having a late failure. But at least you kind of say, for instance, that you have in simple scenarios where you have one ML2 driver, one service provider. In that case, you can fail a startup because you can assess whether they are compatible or not.
If they're going to even use L3.
Well,
if they're not doing provider networks.
If you have a service plugin configured in your cloud, presumably you're going to use it at some point.
Maybe. Depends on what the distro does. If the distro has L3 stuff loaded up, but you're just doing provider network setup. And that's in this Dragonflow spec.
Yeah, I was just looking at it because it was plugged in the
Yeah.
in the file.
I guess a driver could. Anyone has any idea? The driver could subscribe to the port events, and then throw some exception when the port tries to update to bind to an unsupported type.
Yeah, I mean, one problem is fail gracefully. The other is making sure that the right capabilities are advertised based on the configuration of your cloud. So two different problems.
Yeah.
Well, the first one can be easily addressed. The second one can also be addressed, but again, it's not bulletproof. Are both worth addressing? Probably not.
The first one, advertising DVR.
That's the other way around. The first one, I mean, problem one, making sure that at runtime you don't end up you end up like failing gracefully if the combination of drivers that end up like serving a particular user request is not capable of serving that request.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is I go at Neutron extension list, I see a bunch of features advertised, when in reality none of the underlying providers actually are able to fulfill, to provide, to basically implement the capability.
Mm-hmm.
So you may end up like in that situation, fail silently. I mean, I guess ultimately both problems end up leading to a situation where a user issues a request and the behavior is totally not determined. Again, we can either
like DVR and HA, a regular user can't even do anything with those extensions anyway. They're
not
kind
right.
of transparent to the user. Mark, how would Arista use flavors? Yeah.
Primarily for us is we have some users who want DVR and someone actually just hardware acceleration.
Okay, so you would use the mix of both.
Yep. Primarily because you eventually run into hardware limitations, so they need a way to, depending on the workload, shift around.
Okay. So a user would explicitly request like a hardware flavor for performance or something. Okay. I don't see the easy way to do the validation stuff. You can write a spec.
I mean, the one way is to get the ML2 flavors to advertise which L3 flavor they support.
Yeah, but that's.
But then
OBS doesn't know, like, there's going to be a ton of backends that will support. OBS will work with Arista as a top rack driver.
No, OBS as an ML2 driver states which L3 service providers that it supports.
That's what I mean. You don't
know that.
There's out of tree ones like Arista that it would support, and you don't want to have to list
Yeah.
Arista in tree for OBS.
So the other way around is to have the L3 flavors to state which ML2 drivers they support. Like it was done for the Tron service plugin. But then I actually talked about that.
Yeah. There's some cases, like if it is a top of rack driver, it'll basically support anything. If it's happening at the top of rack, it doesn't matter what's happening in the compute node as long as packets get onto the wire. I guess you could have I only support one particular very specific thing, which is the case that we have with Dragonflow and DVR. And then by default, you say support everything or something. So on top rack drivers, the legacy L3 thing, they can all say they support any backend.
No, but yeah, for instance,
If you define it, you're basically excluding it if you don't.
Yeah.
Check script.
Yeah.
So that's reasonable. Yeah, no, that you have an issue with that.
no, I think because this sounds like the same logic that was implemented for the trunk plugin, and I actually gave this some thought and said, okay, I may actually mirror that logic because I wrote that logic. I mean, it's like great logic, right? I wrote it. Yeah, I'm gonna borrow it and I'm gonna apply it in the L3 plugin case and get rid of that nasty config option that he had introduced in Pike. And I might have reached a conclusion where I said, this doesn't seem right, but I don't remember it because I'm senile. So I gotta have to go back and think about this a bit more. So that's why I'm sort of like sitting on the fence right now.
Okay.
So I'll take an action item and then think about this a little bit.
Okay.
Putting that there, I can remember.
Action items. Regard to the action items.
Oh.
Okay. I think anything else L3 flavor related? Do you want to start talking about floating IPs for routed networks right away, or take a break?
Let's take a 5 minutes break.
Okay.
Can I go to the toilet? No. By the way, do you remember that if we talked about this, this way? Yeah, I was talking to if we talked about this.
What?
About,
you were bitching about the configuration option.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
I still like you, don't worry. No, but I remember that you and I kind of like talked about this, and I don't remember whether you we thought about ways to get rid of the option and we didn't reach out any sort of conclusion. I may have to go back and look at my logs because I have this faint recollection that you and I spent some time talking about this. But you're younger, so you have a better memory than me.
No, like I didn't care.
Ihar is actually 75 years old.
Is it? What's your point? What's your elixir of youth? Anyhow.
Are you trying to say something?
Elixir.
Oh.
Elixir.
Elixir.
Elixir?
Yeah, I think we discussed in IRC, but I was not really participating. Like, I didn't care much.
Oh, okay. So were you ignoring me then?
Yeah.
Like I was talking to you, but
like,
you were.
Sometimes I was saying, yeah. Right, good luck.
Oh, okay. I was talking on my. Okay, that explains it then.
That's a plugin for an IRC,
But it
but
was
if
an
people
IRC,
keep
so you
mentioning
can-
your name and say
Okay.
You were like mentioning something. Maybe there are some ideas actually besides just.
maybe there was some signal in the noise.
I can't believe you treat me like shit. That's true.
I've gotten so irritated with the feature number control stuff for Red Hat certification that I've just decided to fix some of the bugs.
Control?
In their networking plugin?
Yeah, like, I mean, so part of the things that we require in our certification process is like pagination support, and that should just work. Like,
Not with Contra.
it should. Like,
Because they don't have they don't even use the DB, so they have to like re-implement everything.
well, I thought, like, okay, but I thought like the API layer stuff,
Oh, the emulated.
the emulated one should
Yeah,
just
yeah.
work. Like, as long as you pass like allow pagination equals true when you run create resource or something like that. Is at least what the documentation.
Yeah.
Or what the code looks like. So I'm
It
just
will work. It will suck will work.
Yeah, because
It will fetch
retrieves everything
and
from the back end and then.
But that's what it'll do anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if manipulation doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not passing.
It's just, it's not as unpleasant for the client. It's still as unpleasant for the back end.
They are free to implement it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To pass that.
Yeah, so that's why, like, it should be like a 1 or 2 line fix, so.
Why do we, I wonder why we even have that then, like, because we have the emulation stuff.
But it
Why do we
defaults to false.
Yeah, why do we even let operators shut it off? Or why do we let plugin developers opt out of the pagination helper?
It's
I
an
don't know.
extension, so they don't necessarily.
It's always advertised, but maybe they still have a way to.
Yeah, well, like if the plugin,
Yeah, like, it defaults, like, create resource defaults to allow pagination equals false.
Maybe we should make it. But then, if there is like some bug somewhere in their implementation, it may break the system.
yeah,
Yeah, we can.
I wonder if we should just look at just either you support native pagination or you get the helper and everybody always gets pagination that way. As API users, that's much less unpleasant.
Especially since there's no real way to tell whether or not it's enabled as a user.
Yeah. Like right now, plugins cannot support pagination at all, and say they don't even want the helper, and then the user just doesn't get pagination.
Although they're not even saying they don't want the helper, they just, by default, it's allow pagination equals false in create resource.
Yeah.
Even though we've got the.
So maybe we should just get rid of the.
Change the default. Or get rid of the options altogether, I guess.
Yeah, it might be something to do with the weird. I remember I was just looking at this validation logic on if your plugin supports native. It's like if it supports native pagination but not native sorting, then it has no way to implement. Like the helper is not any good then, or something. Some weird combination that I can't imagine any sane backend. Yeah, it was like your backend supports pagination but not sorting. Then the helper doesn't help.
I would like 10 random results at a time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I followed the whole thing.
We have pagination helpers. There should be no reason that.
So what do these pagination helpers do?
They fetch everything from the back end and then paginate it.
Oh, so even if the backend doesn't support it, they cache it.
Yeah. Well, they don't even cache it. They just grab everything and then paginate based on whatever tokens are passed on. It's
So
inefficient.
they're HTTP helpers.
Not HTTP. They have it in the controller of the con somewhere. It makes some call to paginate result.
So you want to get rid of it.
There's a way that they can say they don't want any pagination at all. So then users, well, plugin.
The plugins.
Well,
It's still
it's
exposed.
really just that they're not opting into pagination. They're not really saying they don't want it, they just.
They're not saying they want it.
Right. And
So in that case, how is the request handled?
It's not. The users don't get pagination.
yeah,
At all.
you just, no matter what they request, they just get all the
Right.
results, which is kind of weird.
It's here. Right? Your source.
Yeah.
Allow pagination false. Yeah. And allow sorting. We also have sorting.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's
the same. Don't we also require sorting for them? Pass.
I think you need sorting to have pagination.
Oh, you mean like it's pretty somehow
Just search
implicitly
for
enabled or?
Well, there's. I remember there's some check inside there that says like if not sorting, pagination. It's like a combination of native. This exception. What does that do? If allow pagination and self-native. If not native sorting.
Oh, here.
Yeah, yeah.
Pagination.
But yeah, they have to
And
definitely
native.
do stuff for the native pagination, so.
Okay, so this is just making sure that they have native sorting if they have claimed native pagination.
Right.
Which makes that makes sense. So there's
Yeah.
still no reason to not that I can think.
What if they do support native pagination?
Then everything's fine.
Should we do this?
Yeah, that's what I would do. But
I think you should just ignore them completely. See what happens. Just treat them as true. Override whatever they pass in, and just say allow pagination, allow sorting. Because we have helpers. Use the bump up. That's what it's for.
Like that.
Yes.
Ignore the user. Users don't know.
Do you know why we have a way for plugins to just opt out of pagination entirely? So the pagination support, we have pagination helpers for when a plugin doesn't support.
By default, it was false. They normally would have said false.
I think that's only using there are extra parameters for the native plugin to support or something.
The helper. So there's the plugin. If they don't say allow pagination true, then we don't even use the helper, and it just doesn't work for the end user. I don't know why.
Probably you gotta ask
or trace it back to some commit that
Also,
copied code from somewhere.
So like
features helper was introduced.
Maybe the helper.
How to work on some API.
Yeah, well,
so
that was
refactoring. So previously we have pagination or some native pagination support or some plugin class. Plugin class has some attributes.
Yeah. But maybe it was just the order of the things was pagination, and then the helper came later.
To support pagination, each plugin this method needs to accept external parameters. So that's the only reason I see the native pagination support.
Yeah, that makes sense for the native pagination. We just didn't know why allow pagination should ever be false because we have the helpers now.
So that will cause. Now the question is, can we backplate that change?
Very tricky.
I'm working on getting all the old API stuff ripped out now. Now that we have Pecan.
Oh, Pecan,
yeah. So right now the tricky part is the weird unit tests that load up like all kinds of mangled extensions, controllers, and weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, I posted this patch, but would it make sense to somehow set it against something weird? No. like, do they have it's like networking control or something?
Yeah, it's open Contrail, Neutron plugin, or something.
I remember there was some email that went out that said, yeah, some stuff broke.
Contrail Neutron plugin.
I think EHR you fixed.
Yeah, it's project open.
I see some project also broke.
Oh yeah.
What have I fixed?
The OS tester.
Well, it's in those circles where I saw it, but it's just everywhere because everyone copies our gateful.
Yeah.
That was my
announcement. Actually, there is a patch from Thomas to make tools / configure for functional testing somehow work for external repos, and like the change is fine, but like, do we want to go this fast?
To have them depending on
like the next thing we commit something? And
No. Not
so we should maybe start.
Unless we write.
Okay, base is fine.
Maybe we need to write tests for tools configured for functional testing to make sure you don't crash.
Well, maybe there are some bits that they actually may reuse properly.
Yeah.
All they have engaged is just Pepe. Probably one helps much, but
yeah, I'm actually installing Open Contrail and DevStack in a VM right now. So,
You're so dedicated.
well, I don't believe in exceptions. like they don't support this, and like, well, the requirements say that they need to support it. Can they get an exception? Like, no,
That's not how requirements work. They are required.
and I actually said, like, I'm open to us having a discussion whether or not pagination is required for everyone, but I don't understand giving an exception as per the definition of requirement.
Yeah, otherwise, like, why do we ever spend this time to come up with this?
So,
In the end,
especially since it's something that should just work anyway if they just, I mean, last time I looked, it seemed like there were two places they may be called create resource, like here, these three, base.create resource, the others are some that we didn't want, but, so,
I will still spin up some trail.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe was a better we're racing, so you can do it first.
No, I mean, like, they just not validate the entire layer, but maybe they ask us to create some kind of
They actually, in their test, do a skip test on some pagination.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
What do you mean, where? I didn't see anything.
Test loading IP list with pagination. I think these are skip tests.
No, I ended up actually doing it after that. I had
skip test feature
and
needs to be
then someone dropped a note and say, "Oh, people use that."
Yeah, so should we? Okay, so I
That
can
one I did okay. Just gonna
like I can grab for page and name.
I was already late.
Yeah, it was.
It's probably different people. I don't know.
That's I bet you that one.
This is
Yeah, no, I
something
that's
right
like
now.
some sketch.
There's something fresh.
This is the open Contrail Neutron
Remember, yeah, like one summer when I was
But
here,
what is
this?
this?
And like going on the road and stopping along the way, and
Yeah,
you end up having stops, not unplanned stops. So you
So you say this is like it just means they don't have the report on OpenStack?
Yeah, I ended up like
I don't know. This is just what I found.
Yeah,
But it may not.
Are they going to be
be
doing that or not? I don't have the point.
Yeah, because we said once. Just one quarter and the other quarter was information officers of the county.
Wow, I don't see it.
Where they drop people off when they
Get on project.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a fix in this one 20 days ago.
that's also the issue with the
And there's a fix here.
Yeah.
That's one of the people.
Come on.
Screw this.
Actually, there's super and doing the work. I think neither of them actually work.
Yes,
Or
investigate. There's a guy that's
here.
That's new under it. I guess there are all these places.
Miguel?
Yes,
Is Suta is Juniper right now?
He's with Juniper.
Oh,
Since about a year ago.
Right, but not everyone has the same.
Why do we have networking Open Trail on OpenStack and some other plugin?
But that's a good point.
GitHub that is also actively working on?
I guess
Because I
do you
think
think that
that's
it's just a
proprietary
just a budget issue?
Oh, but we have the code?
Yeah, we have, oh, but it's Contrail, like not Open.
No, maybe that's why it's. But it says Open Contrail Neutron plugin.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
But here it says Contrail Nova plugin in the read.
But you see that it burns down.
Is the code similar? Can you open like
It seems. Where's the? Is it just OpenStack networking open Contrail?
There's like 20, and I'm at 9 spoken.
I think it's very similar, like the same thing with suppliers. See, that can be not
Yeah.
and they can fix it for a week.
Yeah. So DevStack networking open Contrail.
I get it. I mean, or maybe they don't have strong enough Vim products.
I mean, this one definitely looks like it has more stuff going on. But this has.
It's also
So Open Contrail is an ML2
but there's a cost
driver, and
Yeah,
Contrail is not.
but previously, Contrail and also Contrail has its own
Yeah.
plugin and it speaks to the API layer.
But I mean,
Right, like this one.
Yeah, but
the Neutron plugin.
So it behaves differently from
Right.
And why they would you have two of them?
Why are there two?
actually, you
But this is definitely the one that they're using because if they're using ML2 pagination, it just works.
So definitely they must have done some
Creator source. This
the
one
inside,
called creator source.
it
does.
is a bit tired.
Oh, but then
So the hardware
Yeah, it's an underscore.
the elevator does look nice. The
Those
door
are
opens
actual
to the seat, funky. My own is not
Otherwise, the application stuff.
that's a
glossy, that creates a little bit of a lovely
So this
yeah, I suppose that this one begins to get to
There's,
the apps that they're going one by
there's
one.
Babe, is Babe.
So then it's let's see.
Oh, it's actually like great. It's not
for like networking.
Still, you get that people hold the door.
I don't see here anything that you to define new extensions or.
I can't think that as a number.
Also, it's just matter
Which I still don't get.
Where do we need to define the source needed or not?
So it's. I mean, it's nowhere in there since it's an ML2 driver.
But that
Yeah,
would be
assuming
in
ML2 does that.
Isn't that
In this,
oh,
Okay, so this is a ML2. This is a core.
right. So
They
like
have a problem here, but then
these three calls, like one of them, I think they even, I don't remember which one it was. Was it? I think this one, they actually passed allow pagination, but the other two they did not.
so some resources work, some don't.
Maybe. So, I was just going to make a patch for the other two calls to pass in allow pagination and then allow sorting through.
number 9.
Those resources that fail. Or you just assume.
I'm just assuming.
The exist is 17.
That's why I was trying to install.
IP gets an exit.
And it occurred to me that I probably didn't actually need to compile. Well, let's go. Compile.
This one, since you're working on this.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So next session is we are going to talk about flooring IPs for router networks. There's a spec already in the for review, and it's in the Etherpad. And if you look at that spec, the spec has it, the patches has the spec itself, and it has also a diagram that I put together to explain better how this is going to work. And essentially what happens is that we completed router networks probably a cycle ago, and some of the people interested in deploying these are also interested in having flooring IPs. So the proposal that I'm making in that spec is that we are going to have BGP dynamic routing together with floating IPs. And essentially, the proposed change is to, for the BGP speaker, extend the BGP speaker to become aware of the router network topology. So right now, the BGP speaker, when you use it for floating IPs or for ports, it becomes aware of the topology of the networks. Mm-hmm. So what I'm proposing is to extend the functionality. So when we associate a BGP speaker to a router network, it's going to become it's going to be self-aware of the topology of the router network in terms of what are the segments and what are the subnets associated to those segments.
So, quick question. So it sounds like this is mainly going to be contained in the BGP project, right?
There's a lot of change in the BGP dynamics.
So why do we need this floating IP translation routed networks option on the Neutron side?
Let me get to that. Okay. Let me get to it. So that's step number one. Step number two, there's an abstraction in BGP dynamic routing, which is BGP peer, which represents the BGP capable routers in the infrastructure. And the next change that I'm proposing is that we are going to add a segment attribute to the BGP peers segment, which is going to be a list.
Okay.
So the physical routers can be associated to one or to several segments in the infrastructure.
Wouldn't you be able to tell? Oh, so these are physical routers.
These are physical routers. Oh, correct. These are the BGP capable routers in the infrastructure.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because really, what BGP, if you want to summarize what the BGP dynamic routing does, it's only the only thing it does is advertise our topology, Neutron topology to.
Yeah. Well, what I was wondering is if there was a way we could derive which segments a router is attached to based on its router interfaces, but that only works for the Neutron ones.
Correct.
Physical.
Correct. So at that point in time, at this point, we have BGP speaker aware of the topology. We can advertise the topology to the routers. So the next set of changes is really on the Neutron side. And there, what we want to do is to we're going to associate one or several subnets to the router network with a service type of floating IPs.
Okay.
So the floating IPs don't belong to a segment or only to a segment. So they belong to the entire network.
Okay, so these are not associated with the segment; they're the kind of global subnets, and they'll have a specific service type. And these are the subnets the floating IPs come from. They're on the external network,
correct.
Right? So is a type, even is a subnet attribute, right?
It's a subnet attribute, yes.
Yeah. And then. So you're introducing a new service type, no?
In principle, no. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay. So we are going to now when we create a floating IP on the subnet network, we are going to go to that subnet to associate the floating IP.
Right. Don't we already have that the subnet types?
Yeah, I think we are replacing the same thing. We already have the subnet types in order to prevent consumption from the external IP.
Yeah. So which direction does it work? Is it allocate floating IPs from particular subnet types, or we do allocate floating IPs from a particular subnet type? Does it impact floating IP allocation, or does it impact DVR interface creation, or both?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I mean, I think it was used for DVR to consume IPs from a dedicated subnet pool.
Yeah. So the service type for a floating IP, wouldn't it just inherit that from the service type on the subnet that it's allocated from?
Well, that came, the service type for the floating IP came about when I had a conference call with I tried to get requirements directly from the people interested.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this. So I had a conference call with GoDaddy, and they said, okay, this looks great, but one of the things that we would like to be able to do is to be able to allocate different types of floating IPs. So what they say is, so for this network or for this network, I want my tenants only to be able to associate as a type of floating IPs that are not routed externally.
Couldn't you represent that with the service type that's on the subnet that the floating IP comes from?
So what I thought of is, okay, I'm going to associate a service type to the floating IP, and the service type of the subnet is going to have routed network floating IP, floating IP, and extend that with whatever string is associated to the different service types of floating IPs. So floating IP, so there might be an internal type of floating IP and external type of floating IP. Does that make sense?
But so wouldn't they always come from the? Would you ever have a mix of types of floating IPs in the same subnet?
No. So the service type of the floating IP is going to serve to select the subnet that we are going to use. The floating IP subnet that we are going to use.
Oh, so when the user is allocating a floating IP, they request a type, and then that determines which subnet pool or which subnet it's going to come.
Correct. Because they want to be able to say, okay, we are going to have floating IPs that are routed only really internally, and floating IPs that are routed externally. So that's why I'm proposing that, extending floating IPs with a service type.
How can user know which service type of floating IP available?
That's something that the operator is going to let their tenants know. Okay, you as a tenant, you have these different types of floating IPs.
I see. And then if the tenant doesn't choose a service type, it'll go to some default, or just use the current.
Well, if the tenant doesn't choose a floating IP service type, yeah, you're going to go to we are going to look for the floating IP for the subnet for floating IPs without any additional service type.
Okay, so just like the current behavior that we have now. Does
go ahead.
So what I'm wondering, is service type? Could we separate the service type thing out into a different spec? Because it's not required for advertising into BGP, right?
It's not.
I wonder if we could then separate this into two different components, because one component is all the changes to BGP dynamic routing, and just to get that use case working, then we can add the service type to allow users to pick specific floating IPs from specific pools, because that seems like it's actually, you might still want to do that even without routed networks entirely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That may be the case.
Yeah. So can we separate the service type thing out of the this spec?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, it can be done.
Okay. So then, what's the option for in Neutron.conf this floating IP translation routed networks thing?
Okay. So again, there's two different flavors of what type of floating IP we want. Let me remember that. GoDaddy, in GoDaddy, what is it that they do? So do we want
Yeah, so they assign the floating IP directly to the VM.
Correct. Correct. So exactly, they have their tenants. So once they assign the floating IP, they have their tenants configure the VM directly.
Right.
So in that case, we don't need a floating IP translation.
But in that case, they just wouldn't be using. They're not using DVR or anything like that anyway, are they? Aren't they have their own?
No.
So do we need a configuration option? Because they wouldn't be using BGP, the BGP speaker and DVR. We could just by not having the DVR service plugin loaded or RL3 service plugin loaded, that would implicitly disable the floating IP address translation.
Correct.
So we might not need this option.
Okay.
Because I think just not having the L3 service plugin from Neutron loaded is automatically going to have that stuff disabled.
Okay. Okay. And then the other option is where we want what we have in normal Neutron.
Yeah.
Where we have address translation for floating IP.
Yeah. And the logic could be written in a way in the BGP speaker to not have to do the floating IP translation with BGP.
So in that when we need address translation, then we are going to use DVR.
Yeah,
we're going to configure DVR, and the current implementation already of BGP dynamic routing already works with DVR.
Right.
But I think the BGP currently works with DVR only for the centralized node. If you want to do it for the compute host, there is some. I think Ryan actually was working on a patch.
The fast exit thing?
Yeah, the fast exit is already there.
Yeah.
But on the other side, for the BGP to advertise on the controller nodes, on the compute host.
Right.
That work.
So the ingress would come back.
Ryan was telling that there should be a patch that has to be added for it to work. But the current thing that currently works is only through the centralized node.
Yeah. Does he have a patch up for that? And that's in the BGP dynamic routing.
Yeah, I think he has a patch. But he also spoke to me before the summit. He said he's willing to work on that.
Okay.
All right. Good to know. And that's the extent of the spec.
Okay. I think I'm not sure service type of floating IP is the right name.
Yeah, it might be. It might not be the right name.
That's why I think we can separate that one out into a different spec to discuss that one, because that can exist independent of the BGP thing.
Yeah. I just put everything together in a single spec, and I wanted feedback. Yeah, it might not be the right name.
There was the feature request that had come up to make external subnets visible, because right now a user can't see the list of external subnets, and the use case was they had some subnets that did special floating IP things and other subnets where the floating IPs did different things, and I think this might actually address that same use case, the service type or whatever we want to call it, because they wanted users to be able to pick from a particular subnet, and right now they can't see the external subnets.
So do we have an RFE for that?
Yeah, do you remember? Yeah, I think I can find it.
So why don't we put that in the?
Yeah, hang on. I think
why would that? Didn't we say that we solve it with a separate API extension to avoid backward incompatibility?
Yeah, and that's like what he's proposing. I think is a lot of overlap with that, which is a floating IP like service type.
Right. Okay.
And I think that might solve that as
but
well.
you want to solve it in the same way by introducing a new API call.
It's a new attribute to
well, yeah, we maybe have a new API call to list the available service types.
That maybe.
Yeah. And so that would work. Then during floating IP allocation, they can specify a service type.
And that also solves Akihira's question. So how is the tenant going to know what?
Yeah.
Also, some type of floating IP maps to the routing segment, so it depends on the VM placement or something. So
I think the service type. See, the service type isn't related to routed networks.
No.
service type was just because they have some floating IPs that aren't routable on the internet and other ones that are.
Or not.
Yeah.
Oh, you found it?
Yeah, because I had that patch up.
How users can know which segment, which floating subnet to be used. Also,
Yeah, so I think that was similar to what this other RFE wanted, was to list the external subnets. But I think we should add a new API that just like lists maybe external like floating IP subnet types, and then the user picks from one of those. And then that way we don't actually ever have to expose the subnet directly to the users.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So let's see. I'll put that under the.
Yeah. So that way I can address the follow-up spec to that RFE.
Yeah.
Request or whatever.
Okay, so floating.
Also, I haven't followed the whole picture.
That's okay. Yeah. Thank you for your feedback. Okay. Sounds good. So that's the extent of the spec.
Okay, and so you're going to work on
this, yeah.
on this and all the BGP changes in that.
Yeah.
Are you going to review it?
On a best effort basis.
Who else is core on the BGP dynamic routing project?
I don't know.
We need Ryan was the only one.
We can see.
Brian, do you want to start reviewing BGP things as well? Okay. Yeah, I think this sounds pretty good.
Current core is here. Kevin Biggram plus Neutron release.
Yeah, it's actually you and Bikram.
That's why I asked, because I noticed that all the BGP dynamic routing patches have been approved by me and Bikram. Let me go into that project and what I'll do for now, I'll just add Neutron core and then you can figure out how to split it up.
Okay.
Okay. How do you change the groups? Oh, access here. Okay, yeah. To include a new group on a project as core. Oh, okay.
No? I do remember something on the comment. Yeah. Yeah, that's not on mine. I don't think you changed that much.
Neutron. Oh, I can add to Neutron dynamic routing core. I can just add Neutron core to that for now. Okay. There. Okay.
So next session is going to be the Nova Neutron session.
Yeah. Oh, and
that's they have a ballroom downstairs. Where next to where we are having lunch, it's a ballroom.
Are they in B?
What?
Are they in B?
No, I think
Nova.
Who than just the fun?
Is it Nova?
It's ballroom A.
What's that?
It's ballroom A. Oh. I just pinged Matt. So that's where we're.
Yeah, that's Nova.
That's another one.
No,
Because doesn't the rest support BGP?
You have to have a customer.
No.
So
Sales customers want it.
we get together again at 1 at ballroom A.
But I thought BGP fabrics were Thursday, the future.
The future. Sales customer wants it.
That's surprising.
Yeah.
If you support any dynamic routing protocols?
No, it's not exactly almost. Nobody's come to us asking for it. I mean, we have.
So just
We have
static routing is happy.
We have plans shown that if the first customer comes asking for it.
Interesting.
But the
Thank
funny
you.
thing is, you ask customers, "Hey, we did this."
High speed trading doesn't use a lot of BGP. Weird obscure reference.
Mhm.
Obscure reference.
Yeah, I mean, that's just funny. I mean, we do have more routing workloads, but not with OpenStack.
Oh no, that's really because the rest of network switches you have implementation of BGP in those.
Oh, yeah, that's too.
Okay, that's what I was blowing my mind.
That's the thing. You know, you have the code as is. You know, you don't touch it.
Okay.
So you want to be like
I
as pristine as
BGP routing.
as pure as. But there are fixtures all over the place. Fixtures all over the place.
Well, those fixtures are to set the environment.
Right.
I
But
think when it comes to process, it's
Right, but then I get to use the fixture to change your module value and module value, and with that, that will potentially change the how the bridge name gets.
I remember didn't the IGRP have a problem where it's just going at the
Just let me finish this, okay? Give me a second.
Start in the process, we don't have any free process.
Right.
We just configure
Yeah,
it.
it's gotta be close
So
together.
that it's cleaned up. And then we start somebody running and deploying. As you do.
I mean, I can say in Fedstream, I can say use fixture. Frankly, that fixture ends up
something inside this process. That customer, then you start because it's like you don't start with from the
Oh, I see what you're
from
saying.
the environment and then inside the main.
I see.
So for some agents, we actually we overcome. So we don't have any kind of special agents that almost mean outputting something else.
So when in the Calico deployment is your fabric, L2 fabric, or you pure with or the
And then
or whatever.
so
So I see.